Hi, everybody. Today we're going to talk about the new PreSTAR. Yes, the FDA released the PreSTAR version 3.0 on June 1st. They also released the eSTAR version 7.0 on the same day. But today we're going to talk about the PreSTAR because the changes that they made there have a much bigger impact in general for companies, and the eSTAR changes, more minor changes that we're going to cover next week. So this week, we're going to focus on the PreSTAR version 3.0. And in particular, I would pay attention to the slide on SIR meetings. So if you don't know what an SIR meeting, pay attention to that one, maybe watch it once or twice, because that will really save you some time. And it's one of the most important meetings whenever you're going through the 510K process. So let me share my screen here. Okay. And I'm actually going to move my, or attempt to move that. Okay, too big. Sorry, everybody. I thought I had the bugs worked out of this. Okay, we're sharing my screen here. We're not sharing my video. I will add my video back in. But these are the two screens. On the left, we have the version 2.2 PreSTAR, and on the right, we have the version 3.0 PreSTAR. And at the very beginning of it, before you can do anything with the PreSTAR, the first thing you have to do is select what type of submission you're doing with the PreSTAR. And my recommendation is to select display all options. And then you can see all the options for how you can use the PreSTAR. And the ones that are bracketed in the arrow, those are the new ones that they've added. Before, they were grayed out. You could see they were planned, but they weren't enabled or active. Now they're enabled and active. So you can do a lot more submissions. The IDE things that are at the bottom, those are not new, at least not of version 3.0. They were new on version 2.0. So whenever the FDA goes adding whole new functionality to this, they up rev the primary revision. And that also means that you're not going to be able to use the old version any longer. And they actually give you a deadline, which I'm going to show you in a moment. Okay, so everybody asks, can I still use version 2.2 instead of upgrading everything to 3.0? The reason why somebody would ask that question usually is because they've already started with version 2.2 and they don't want to do the work of converting it to 3.0. Now, right out of the box, when I tried importing 2.2 into 3.0, it worked like an absolute dream really fast. I figure after Adobe and the FDA managed to put a few more bugs in the system, it won't work anymore. So it always seems to work during the first few weeks of when they release the new version of the eSTAR or the PreSTAR. It works great. And then after a while, it slows way down. And I've been told that's some bugs in the system that have to be fixed. And Adobe says, we don't know anything about it. And FDA says, oh, it's all Adobe's fault. So, blame Adobe, I guess. So anyway, there are three different places where it says this eSTAR version will be retired. So if you're submitting before August 3rd, you can use the old one. And if you're not submitting an SIR or one of those other options that they've newly enabled, then there was no real benefit to you to do that. However, if you're doing an SIR, like we happen to be preparing an SIR for a client, it's perfect timing for us. It actually saves us some work. We had already kind of set up the e-copy to send, but this enables us to do a PreSTAR instead of an e-copy, which is faster and better and easier, and make sure that you have everything there and eliminates any possibilities of an e-copy hold, which we don't like. Now, I talked to before about display all options. Some people just have a mind like a steel trap and they can remember the difference between a request for feedback information and a request for meeting and a request for determination. They never make a mistake. But The rest of us might get confused once in a while, particularly if we're tired or whatever, and we might forget and pick the wrong option. We don't see what we're looking for. So just pick display all options, gives you all the options, and then you pick the one you want, saves you a step. It's really not that hard. So that's what I recommend. Pick on that. But there are 5 different general types of pre-stars. There's a request for feedback, a request for a meeting, a request for determination. The expedite programs is a functionality they have not enabled yet. So you won't see that yet. But that is planned for the future. And then we have the investigational device exemptions, which were enabled in version 2.0. So I recommend picking the specific option, and I'm not even letting you see here at the bottom. Display all options, and then whatever one you want. So now the first the first option at the top of the list, once you've selected display all options, is a 513G. And a lot of people ask me whenever I say you might need to do a 513G, or the FDA says in a pre-sub, we can't answer that question. You'll have to submit a 513G. Those are usually how that discussion begins. What that means is you need the 3-letter product code classification, and this is where it can be seen. They have a product classification search database, and they have a 510K database. If you're looking at a specific 510K summary on the screen, before you click on the actual summary hyperlink, the one on the right that shows you where it is, and the one on the left, that is where it is in the product classification database. And you can even search the database by any one of the other terms, and it will give you all the product code options. So that's what a 3-letter product code is. And basically, when you would use a 513G, you're not sure which product code you should submit under. You're not sure where you should be looking for a potential predicate. So in this case, you ask the FDA. It might be a borderline case. You're not sure. You think it might be a de novo. You want it to be a 510K. You can submit a rationale to the FDA. We think it's a de novo for this reason, or we think it's a 510K for this reason, or we think it's exempt for this reason. Yes, you can do exempt too. But if you're doing exempt for these submissions, and maybe I'll put back on my my video here if I can. So we'll try to do that again. Okay. So when you are trying to convince the FDA that your product should be exempt, let's say you have a biofeedback device, and the biofeedback devices, I think they're HCC or HHC is a 3-letter product code, and you want it to be that. Well, if you've added some other functionality to this device, or it's used for a very specific indication that normally biofeedback devices are not used for, then you're in a situation where you need to convince the FDA that you're right and they're wrong. In that particular case, there is a place in the regulations where it's called the limitations of exemption. It's always the first 3 letters of the regulation. So on the screen here, I don't think you can see it well, actually, because it's blinded by my video. So I will go back to my other video here. go on to the next slide here. So for this one, I've shown you all the display options. So the next question usually is, and this is the most common reason for using the PreSTAR in the first place, is you're going to submit a pre-sub. But there are two options. So if you didn't pay attention, the first one is request for information or feedback. They're just going to send you an email response. So the 513G, it's a form letter email response. The SIR, it could be a form letter email response. The pre-sub could be a form letter email response. So the first three are just email responses coming back to you. If that's all you want is an email answer, you don't need anything more, select option one. One possible reason for that is nobody on your team speaks English. You only read English. So you really don't want to do that. Another could be you're 18 hours away or 12 hours away in terms of time zones, and you just don't want to conform to the FDA 9 to 5 timeline or 8 to 5 timeline that they would normally have a pre-sub meeting. The third most likely reason is that in this particular situation, you're pretty sure you're going to get the answer, but you just want it in writing. And if it's a different answer than you wanted, it was a no instead of a yes, still not a big deal. You want to save yourself the extra work of preparing meeting minutes and submitting the meeting minutes. You're trying to save the FDA the time and effort of having a meeting. The theory goes that you'll get your meeting sooner if you ask for an email response. It's a great theory. I have yet to have it actually work out that way for myself. Every single email response I've ever received has been later than the email responses I get when it's tied to a meeting. The FDA tracks their meetings, schedules their meetings, but they don't schedule email responses. So they're going to deliver it probably on the 75th day, which is their deadline. Or actually, I think it's 70 days. So you're going to get it as late as possible to still meet their metrics. So that's probably what you're going to get if you ask for an email response only. But sometimes it's nice not to create the meeting minutes, unless you're a consultant and want lots of billable hours. We generally recommend whatever the most expeditious route is. And usually the reason why you want the meeting is you're not sure which way the FDA is going to answer, and you want to ask a follow-up clarification question if they answer one way or another. And you can't do that in an email format. You can't ask those follow-up questions without submitting a supplement. So that's the number one reason why people want option two. Okay, let's go on to the next slide here. What is an SIR? So I'm gonna for a second here, I'll just change my other things that are important to understand. The submission issue review meetings are what you submit as soon as you get a hold letter. So the FDA sends you a request for additional information. We call that an AI hold letter or an AI letter. That letter, you have 180 days to respond to it with your supplement. You must request your meeting within 60 days. If you don't, then it's going to be a traditional Q-sub meeting with the FDA, and you're going to have to wait 75 days instead of 3 weeks. So one of the best features of these SIR meetings is you get the meeting faster, and they try to schedule it within 3 weeks, but it's no guarantee. They would like all these SIR meetings to be 30 minutes, but you are permitted up to 60 minutes. So in general, you're better off requesting the 60 minutes in finishing early. The FDA will be thrilled if you finish early. They will never complain that you finish the meeting early. Email or meeting, we already discussed this for the pre-subs, but the SIR, you don't have both options. In a pre-sub, they send you the email response first, and then 5 days later, you have a meeting to discuss the email, and they give you the option of canceling the meeting if the email was sufficient. SIRs don't have that option. So it's either an email response from the FDA or a meeting. You cannot have both. And therefore, if you're going to submit a slide deck with an agenda for an SIR meeting, that is the entire thing. All your questions are there, your agenda's there, everything's in that slide deck. So an SIR meeting request, that slide deck has basically everything the FDA needs to know in it if you did it well. If you don't have everything you need in there, not the agenda, not the attendees, not the timing, not the, let's say the login information, if not all that stuff's in there, there is a scenario in which every single one of those missing things is a problem. And that's why we have a template that we use for our SIR meetings to make sure we don't forget something. We highly recommend that you do an SIR meeting before you do any more testing so you don't waste money. But it's extremely recommended that you do it before you submit a supplement to the AI hold, because you don't get 2 AI holds 99% of the time. It's less than 1% of the time you get 2 AI holds. So do not squander your opportunity to ask an SIR question. It's just a 3-day wait. It's worth it. So highly recommend and extremely recommend the before you submit your supplement, because you don't get 2 shots at this. Okay, next type of submission for the PreSTAR is an informational meeting. A lot of people misuse their pre-sub meetings. The pre-sub meeting is not, the purpose of that meeting is not to say hello to the FDA, meet them and greet them and build a relationship with them. That would be more the purpose of an informational meeting, and it's unlikely that you need to do that. Yes, certain cultures really value that very highly. The FDA is a bureaucracy. They just want to do their job and get it done. They have more work than they have time for. They have limited resources and budget. The relationship building is not as important to the FDA, but that is one of the purposes. Another purpose is the roadmap to update. So if you are doing a complex series of submissions, let's say you are BioFire and you want to come out with a new combination multiplexed assay, and you and I just picked them because that's the kind of submission they do a lot. And then there's going to be a new species of infectious disease that you're going to detect that requires a de novo, but you want to multiplex it with all the 510K ones. That creates a problem because you can't combine 510K and de novo in the same submission. So you have to get your de novo first, and then after your de novo is granted, then you can combine that with your other multiplex tests in a 510K and release the new multiplex tests. But a lot of people aren't familiar with that because they haven't gone down that de novo pathway for an IVD. So they think they can just combine the two, and the FDA says, no, sorry, you've got a problem here for your regulatory pathway. You cannot combine these 510K tests with your de novo test in the same de novo submission. You have to get one, and then you can submit the other. And then the most common reason is the top, introducing a new technology. And sort of the other reason why I was thinking of adding BioFire, if you develop brand new molecular detection technology, and it's going to be a platform for all your infectious disease IVD kits, that new technology, that's something the FDA hasn't seen before. So you want to explain that to the FDA and explain it's going to be a platform technology. And you might even explain, we're choosing this one first because we think this will be the easiest to get through the FDA and it's low risk. So it gives the FDA an opportunity to review the technology and get your first 510K clearance or de novo. And then after that, we're going to add all these other organisms into the second, third, fourth, fifth using that same platform technology. What the FDA may come back to you with in meaning now, granted, they don't have to give you any feedback, but that is kind of one of the purposes. But it's going to be all informal and it's going to be normally in the form of questions. But they might be asking, well, why don't you do this as a category? Like if you were doing blood testing, you'd want to look at a panel of tests, not a single test. So think in terms of panels, because the FDA would prefer when they're issuing a de novo to issue it for a broader classification so they don't have so many new regulations just because you launch a new technology. They would prefer to do it as a panel, so like all respiratory diseases, and you have the same criteria for each respiratory disease. That would be great to have a panel for one technology rather than each individual analyte you're looking for is a separate de novo. That costs a lot of burden for the FDA and you. So think about doing an informational meeting with the FDA when you're introducing a brand new technology, and it might be going down the de novo path. And a lot of companies they have these new technologies, they don't take the FDA up on the option of an informational meeting. It really can help. Okay, another option is 100-day meetings for PMAs. If you don't know what a 100-day meeting is, that's probably because you don't do PMAs. Now, we don't generally do PMAs. We have helped on pre-subs that lead to PMAs in some IDs and some requests for designation, for risk designation. But generally, unless you're doing a PMA, you're never going to do a 100-day meeting, but it's just a status update with the FDA at the 100-day mark on your application. So that is the purpose of the meeting. If you already do PMAs, you already know what this is. If you don't, now you can use this PreSTAR for that. But this is much more valuable to the people that are actually doing PMAs that know what a 100-day meeting is. Like, oh, great, I don't have to do e-copies anymore. I can do this instead. Great. The next one is requests for determination. It's a whole section. So there are 3 different types. There's an existing accessory request, new accessory request, and study risk determination. The request for determination is not for combination product submissions. There is something by the same term, so it confuses everybody. Request for determination, is this going to be the jurisdiction of drug or jurisdiction of device or biologics? So is it CDER, CBER, or CDRH that's going to have the jurisdiction for a combination product? That is something that gets submitted to the Office of Combination Products, and that is not the purpose of this type of submission in a PreSTAR. They don't have a PreSTAR yet for that type of submission. It goes directly to the folks at OCP, not going to the document center for being handed off to CERH. So you're not generally going to be using it for that. That's why I highlighted not. Existing accessory request, if you have something that is an existing accessory in your device, you might want to submit something to the FDA about changes to that accessory or changing the classification of it or something like that. Particularly useful when you think your accessory is a lot lower risk and you don't want the FDA to regulate it the same way they do the device. So that would be a time where you might even request the FDA grant a whole separate product classification for the accessory to save them work and you work. That's the least burdensome route. Another possibility is you have a new accessory that you're developing that nobody's ever come up with to use with that device. Something that just comes to mind all of a sudden, if we have trays that we're sterilizing for the OR for an orthopedic case, and we want to track those devices and have traceability and trackability of each tray and its status better, and we want to do that with RFID technology or some other tracking wireless technology, that might be an accessory that we're going to attach to the tray. That would be a new accessory, and we don't want it necessarily to fall under the same category and be regulated the same way a tray does, because the trays, you need to have them be dry and drain the liquid properly and maintain the sterility and all these things. Not much of that really matters to an electronic clip-on device that's used for tracking where is the tray. And then the last part, the most common reason that I anticipate people are going to use this request for determination option is study risk determinations. If you're doing a clinical study, so you're doing a high-risk device, you're doing a device that you want to make claims for that nobody's ever made before, you're doing a de novo, or you're doing a PMA, when you need to do a clinical study, there are some studies that are significant risk that require FDA approval of the study before you can conduct it. And there's others that are non-significant risk studies that do not require FDA approval. They only require an IRB approval or Institutional Review Board approval. And in those cases, the NSR studies, you can get them to get those started much sooner. There's fewer hoops to go through. But the study risk determination, if you're not absolutely sure that it's an NSR study, you're probably going to do a study risk determination, submit it to the FDA, and now you can use the PreSTAR for that. And you would do that separately from your pre-ID meeting, your IDE meeting, or pre-IDE meeting. You'd be asking for feedback on a protocol. So you're not sure that the protocol is final yet. You submit your ID when your protocol is final and all your safety testing is done except for the clinical study. So it would be in parallel with your pre-IDE or just before your pre-IDE meeting, maybe very early on, just to get the FDA's opinion in writing. Is this significant risk or not? And oftentimes the FDA is a little more conservative than the IRBs are. And so if you want the conservative answer, go with the FDA and get study risk determination. And some IRBs insist you do that anyway. Okay, the last thing on the list is the IDE. This was the new thing that they added in version 2.0. IDE stands for Investigational Device Exemption. The regulations that are specific to this is 21 CFR 812. And IDEs are how you get approval for a significant risk study. So the first one is the risk determination. You get them to say whether it is or is not. And then the second one, the IDE, is now we're getting approval for that significant risk study. They are two different submissions. So even before you do your de novo, you're probably going to have a study risk determination, a pre-sub reviewing or pre-IDE reviewing your protocol, then an IDE to approve the clinical study, and then you're going to submit your de novo. And you might have a few more IDEs, a few more pre-subs in there too, to ask other testing questions like biocompatibility and software and cybersecurity and things like that. And that takes us to the very end of our presentation. I don't have any other questions that people have put in there. If you have questions, you're watching this as a recording later on, go ahead and put your comments down below. I haven't looked at our YouTube channel comments and questions in quite a while. So right after I hang up here, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to answer some questions. I probably got a bunch waiting for me. But thank you for joining me today. And I hope you enjoy the new PreSTAR 3.0. And join us next Thursday at 12:30 Eastern Time. And we're going to cover the eSTAR changes in 7.0. See you then.